You're standing by a train track. A runaway trolley is speeding toward 5 people tied to the rails. Next to you, a lever. If you pull it, the trolley switches tracks and kills one person instead. What do? Because your answer reveals everything about your morality. Today we will talk about the ethical dilemma that will break your brain, utilitarianism. So before we start, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. The foundation of utilitarianism: maximizing happiness. Utilitarianism is one of the most powerful and consequentialist ethical theories, asserting that the morally right action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Its core tenet is the principle of utility, or the greatest happiness principle. This principle was famously championed by its founders, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who sought a rational objective basis for morality and legislation. In essence, it demands that we evaluate the consequences of our actions, laws, or policies, and choose the option that maximizes overall happiness, or utility, and minimizes suffering. This framework is radically impartial, requiring us to count everyone's interests equally, regardless of their social status, relationship to us, or geographical location, making it a compelling, yet highly demanding, moral compass. The utilitarian calculation: pleasure and pain. To apply the theory, a utilitarian must perform a utilitarian calculation. This involves identifying all possible courses of action, then determining the sum total of pleasure and pain, or benefit and harm, that each action is likely to produce for every individual affected. Bentham originally conceived of this in terms of simple quantifiable units of pleasure and pain, a concept he called the felicific calculus. Later, Mill refined this, arguing that there are qualitative differences in pleasures. Intellectual and moral pleasures are higher and more valuable than purely sensual ones, famously stating it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. The ethically correct choice is simply the one that yields the highest net balance of good over bad. The sheer complexity of accurately forecasting all consequences and assigning comparative values to intangible goods like life, art, or freedom is the first major practical dilemma that begins to break your brain. The two faces of utilitarianism: act versus rule. The theory evolved into two main varieties to address some of its inherent problems. Act utilitarianism judges the morality of each individual action by its direct consequences. If, in a specific situation, a lie produces greater overall happiness than the truth, the act utilitarian must lie. This form is often criticized for being too flexible and potentially justifying morally objectionable acts like theft or lying if the immediate calculation favors it. In contrast, rule utilitarianism focuses on the consequences of establishing a general rule of conduct. An action is right if it conforms to a rule, like don't lie or keep promises, that, if generally followed, would maximize happiness in the long run. Rule utilitarianism is often seen as a more stable, less demanding, and more intuitively correct approach, though critics argue that in situations where breaking the rule would clearly lead to greater good, a rule utilitarian becomes guilty of rule worship. The sacrificial dilemma, the core brain breaker. The most famous ethical dilemmas that severely challenge utilitarianism are those involving sacrifice of the individual for the collective. The classic example is the trolley problem, where one must choose between allowing 5 people to die or actively diverting a runaway trolley to kill one person instead. A pure act utilitarian must pull the lever, as $5 greater than $1 life saved. A similar, and more disturbing, dilemma involves the potential for a doctor to secretly harvest the organs of one healthy person to save 5 others needing transplants. Since 5 lives saved outweigh 1 life lost, a pure utilitarian analysis seems to sanction murder for the greater good. This consequence fundamentally clashes with deep-seated moral intuitions regarding individual rights and the inviolability of human life, presenting a genuine cognitive conflict. The problem of justice and rights. A central and devastating criticism is that utilitarianism fundamentally fails to take into account considerations of justice and individual rights. Because the theory only cares about the net sum of happiness, it can potentially justify actions that are grossly unfair or violate a person's fundamental moral rights, provided that the overall societal benefit is large enough. For instance, punishing an innocent person, perhaps an unpopular minority member, might deter widespread rioting and thus maximize public safety and happiness. While this action is intuitively repugnant, the utilitarian framework appears forced to endorse it. The theory is distribution neutral. It doesn't care how happiness is distributed, only that the total amount is maximized, leaving the unfortunate few with no intrinsic protection against being exploited for the benefit of the many. The overly demanding nature of morality. Utilitarianism is also criticized for being an overly demanding moral theory that seems to require us to act as moral saints. Since we must always act to maximize the greatest good, there is effectively no moral limit to our obligations. Every time we choose to spend money on a personal luxury, such as a concert ticket or a new gadget, a utilitarian could argue that the money should have been donated to a highly effective charity, where it could have produced a greater benefit, e.g., saving a life in a distant country. The moral imperative is constant, eliminating the realm of the supererogatory, actions that are good but not morally required. This continuous obligation to transcend self-interest and personal commitments, such as prioritizing the needs of strangers over one's own children or career, can feel psychologically impossible and ultimately lead to a form of moral burnout. The problem of prediction and measurement. Another insurmountable practical dilemma lies in the challenge of predicting and measuring consequences. Utilitarianism requires us to be omniscient calculators, accurately forecasting the long-term, complex, and often unforeseen effects of an action on all sentient beings. This is impossible in the real world, where consequences are often unpredictable. Furthermore, as noted earlier, the theory requires a way to measure and compare diverse types of happiness, suffering, and value, comparing the misery of one person with the pleasure of 1,000. How much happiness from a piece of art is equal to the suffering of a sick patient? Without a reliable, objective metric, a true hedonometer, the utilitarian calculation often collapses into subjective guesswork, undermining the very rational objectivity the theory aims to achieve. The enduring appeal and practical application. Despite its brain-breaking dilemmas, the core logic of utilitarianism remains powerfully compelling and is widely influential in certain practical domains. The notion that we should strive for the best possible outcome for the collective is highly intuitive, especially when applied to public policy, economics, and social welfare. Tools like cost-benefit analysis, which underpin decisions in areas like public health, environmental regulation, and infrastructure planning, are essentially secular, applied versions of the utilitarian calculation. The theory forces us to look beyond immediate self-interest and consider the impartial interests of all affected, serving as a constant, powerful reminder that morality is fundamentally about reducing suffering and increasing well-being on a global scale, making it an indispensable, if flawed, cornerstone of ethical debate. If you like this video and would like to see more like it, please give it the thumbs up. Leave a comment and click the button to subscribe.